My name is John Lucas, and today we're going to be interviewing for the Knoxville Bar Association Historical Project former Magistrate Judge Robert Murrian. Judge, would you go ahead and tell everyone your full name?
Robert Philip Murrian.
And what was your full date of birth?
April 1, 1945.
April Fool's Day.
Thank you a lot, John.
And I understand that you're a graduate of the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis. Is that correct?
Yes, I wore my tie in honor of you, West Point graduate.
Well, and I'm happy to see that you did. Would you tell us a little bit about your service as a naval officer after you graduated from Annapolis?
Well, I went through nuclear power training for a year, and then I went into submarine service and served in Ethan Allen during my naval career.
And what was Ethan Allen?
Ethan Allen was a fleet ballistic missile submarine. We operated in the Atlantic.
They have a nickname for that kind of sub?
A boomer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were a boomer?
I was on a boomer.
Okay. And during that time, did you serve, I believe you served under Admiral Hyman Rickover?
Well, not directly, but I had to interview with him.
Tell me about that. I've heard stories about some of his interviews.
Well, I was very brief, and I don't remember much about it. They always said the briefer the better, and he asked me why I'd taken some soft courses at the Naval Academy and not taken math and physics as much as I should have, and I remember that.
Okay. Would you share with us a little bit how your training at Annapolis and how your subsequent service in the Navy shaped your life and legal career?
Well, one thing you learn in the Navy, and I'm sure you do in the Army too, is responsibility for yourself and others, discipline, how to take care of yourself and to be responsible for not only yourself but the team that you work with.
From what little I know about the nuclear Navy, I understand that precision and attention to detail is very important too. How did that sort of training carry over to your judicial and legal career?
Well, I really learned how to study best in nuclear power school. Not that I didn't learn at the Naval Academy, but it was very concentrated and very high pressure, and just learning how to be organized and to study was a great benefit in law school.
And then how long did you serve on active duty?
I was on active duty for about 5 years.
And then when you got off active duty, did you go straight to law school?
Yes.
And where'd you go?
University of Tennessee.
And what year did you graduate?
I graduated in 1974.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about your practice and your legal career before you went on the bench.
Well, I was fortunate enough to go with a firm that existed then, Butler, Vines, Babb, and Threadgill. It was a primarily litigation, insurance defense work, and just some really fine people, mentors, and people helped me along, and served here in Knoxville with them for a little over 2 years. Let's see. Yeah, before I went on the bench.
Who were some of your mentors that you mentioned?
Oh, I forgot. Being a law clerk to Robert L. Taylor was probably the reason that I was able to go back and be magistrate judge, and that was invaluable experience, learning firsthand the inner workings of the federal court. As far as mentors go, Judge Taylor, of course, was a mentor, and Warren Butler, Bill Vines, folks like that helped me along and got me started in the practice.
Who do you remember most or best as one of your mentors early in your career? And you don't have to single out a particular person, but if there's any Any person or event that stands out, share that with us.
Well, I think working with the judge, Judge Taylor, in federal court gave me a perspective that it's good to have a perspective about the way the judicial system works. I saw him working through making difficult decisions and how he did it, and I think that was invaluable to me in my later career.
Okay. And then what year did you first go on the bench as a magistrate?
1978.
Now, did I use the right phrase? Because initially you were magistrates and not magistrate judges. Is that right?
That's right.
And then just tell us a little bit about your career as a magistrate and then as a magistrate judge. What do you remember most about that, and what did you like best?
Well, when I went on the bench, the jurisdiction was limited. We didn't do consent cases, so it was basically preliminary hearings, pretrial work. I did a lot of pretrial work in civil cases, putting together plans for trials and pretrial orders. Then when the jurisdiction expanded and we became eligible to try any case by consent, the job really became quite interesting, and you know, all kind of cases come to federal court, everywhere from car wrecks to securities regulation cases, things like that, antitrust cases, and I was fortunate to be a magistrate at a time when the job was evolving, and when I was able to do some really interesting work.
I remember, and I will say this because I know you won't say it, but some years ago, back in the 80s and maybe even into the early 90s, the local newspaper used to do polls of lawyers about the judges in this area. And you were consistently rated by the local bar as the best judge in the area. And I know that I wanted to say that for people that are watching this years from now, in spite of your uncharitable comments about the Army. But I know that when you were a magistrate judge, a lot of people consented to trying their cases before you. Were some of those jury trials as well as bench trials?
Mostly jury trials, yes.
I know this will be a rough number, but during your career as a magistrate judge, about how many actual trials do you think you presided over?
Oh, over 200.
Really?
Yeah.
Are there, how many of those, you said most of them were jury trials, of those 200, how many do you think were jury trials? 35%, something like that.
Okay.
Are there any of those cases in particular that stand out in your mind as the most interesting or challenging?
Well, one of the big events of my career was when the United American Bank went down, and I think that had something to do with you coming to town, as I remember. The UAB failed in 1982, and that certainly sent huge shock waves throughout this area. The FDIC came to town and camped out on our doorstep, and we were really very busy with that. Also, one of the cases that got a lot of attention was some firemen from Florida came up and were poaching deer in Cades Cove. Of course, it was like shooting ducks in a pond, but they wouldn't even keep the meat. They would just take the antlers and go. And finally, the Rangers were able to catch them, and we tried them. And I think several of them went to jail over that.
I remember talking to you about that case when you and I were hiking one time. And I remember that in addition to just describing what happened, you expressed concern about those defendants and their families. Do you remember that?
I don't remember the conversation, but of course, being firemen, they were pretty solid citizens, other than poaching deer, you know. And it was really astonishing that they would do such a thing.
Are there any other cases that you would care to mention for us that stand out that you recall either fondly or not so fondly during your career?
Well, we had an antitrust case involving a local wholesale grocer that we tried, and it was
Would that have been Kaz Walker?
no, it was
Okay.
it was not Kaz Walker, but it was a local wholesaler, and it was a multi-million-dollar verdict, 6-person jury, and very, very interesting case.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I think that was the KMC Irving Trust case.
That's correct.
And I believe you were ultimately affirmed by the Sixth Circuit in that case.
Yes, correct.
And if my recollection is right, Bill Vines represented the plaintiff in that case.
Yes.
I remember also, and I have some somewhat distinct memories about this, back in the mid-'80s, I think you were the first judge around here who entered an order and an opinion that it was improper for lawyers at a deposition to instruct a witness not to answer. Do you recall that?
No. No. I may have. I don't know.
Okay. Because I remember that was a widespread practice until you entered that opinion. And even though you don't remember it, I guarantee you there are lawyers who do, because it dramatically changed the deposition practice in this part of the state. Judge, do you or did you have a judicial philosophy that you can sum up in a sentence or two?
Well, give both sides an opportunity to be heard. I think the perception of justice is extremely important, and if folks don't feel like they've had the opportunity to be heard, if they get cut off and yelled at, and I think that is detrimental to the whole system. So within bounds, giving the people opportunity to be heard is fundamental. Perception is so important in trying to do justice, and people that feel like they've had a fair opportunity to air their side of the case are going to feel better about the system than people that get cut off and don't get an opportunity.
Judge, when did you retire from the bench?
2002.
So if my math is right, you had 24 years active service on the bench.
Correct.
During that 24 years, what do you think were the most significant changes that you saw in the legal profession?
Well, the sentencing guidelines were a profound effect, and the old-time judges didn't like it much because they thought, that was their responsibility to set sentencing. The expansion of federal jurisdiction along drug lines and drug cases and gun cases, just so many drug cases. I didn't know what the DEA was when I went on the bench, but I found out what the DEA was, and those were big changes.
What about in civil cases, discovery or use of technology or anything else that strikes you?
Well, sometimes I felt like the discovery was out of hand, and sort of it'd be maybe better to do a little less discovery and just more trial work, and because it gets awfully expensive and awfully complicated, and I spent, as a magistrate judge, spent a lot of time trying to sort out discovery disputes.
Judge, if you had one piece of advice to give to young lawyers today on March 24, 2014, what would it be?
Well, I think from a personal standpoint is to try to never put yourself in a position where you felt like you had to do something you wouldn't ordinarily do. Just try to avoid those situations as best you can, and then you won't have to be tempted to step over the line would be one piece of advice. The same advice I would give to my children, but just don't get close to temptation, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
All right, that's good advice for all of us, young lawyers as well as, shall we say, more mature lawyers.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, how would you like to be remembered from your time on the bench and your legal career?
Well, I think one thing that I was told early in my career was lawyers like consistency. They can deal with a judge that's a little bit this way or that, but just don't be all over the map. Be consistent. I'd like to be remembered as a person who lawyers felt like they could come into court and they would have some ability to know how the case would be tried, and that ultimately people would be given an opportunity to be heard.
Well, I think I can safely speak for the Knoxville Bar by saying that I am confident that when you were on the bench, people knew that they could come into your court, know how the case would be tried, knew that it would be tried fairly, and that they would get a full day in court. And so we appreciate your service, Judge.
Thank you very much, John.